Welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show. As always, I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Unfortunately, we didn't use our frequent flyer miles and make the trip to Lisbon, Portugal last week for SBC Lisbon, but someone who did, and a regular on this program, Jessica Welman, the editor-in-chief of SBC Americas, the editor-in-chief at Canadian Gaming Business. And Jess, I don't know if you've added any other titles to your business card lately, but welcome you back to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here and talk about all sorts of things from all corners of the globe. It'll be international flair today.
Hey, let's start by getting you to toot the SBC horn a little bit, and again, congratulations to you and Dennis Allgreen and Bob McFarlane and everybody involved in last week's conference in Lisbon. I think more than 25,000 attendees. I read. I think representing about 175 countries, and it's obviously a great week for your employers.
Yeah, I have to be brutally clear here. I can take zero credit for the success of Lisbon. Like, I show up, I attend, I offer to help out where I can, but I kept telling my colleagues they really completely outdid themselves. The amount of work that went into this and just seeing how hard everyone worked and then to see the final product. I've been to G2E many times. I've been to our Barcelona event, which was obviously, one of the biggest gaming shows there is. I really can't overstate how enormous this show was. It would be just if you were to walk from the entrance to the very end without stopping, it would probably take you 20 minutes. Just the footprint itself was so crazy. And I was moderating a lot, so I had the benefit of kind of getting to see a little bit of everything. I got to go be in the affiliate leaders area. I got to go be in the payment expert area. Our booth was kind of camped up between the two sports betting halls, and then there was an iGaming hall. Just something for everyone, an extraordinary amount of content. And then the main stage, we called it the super stage. It's literally the arena that if Taylor Swift were to come to Lisbon, this is where she would put on a show. And we're putting conference content on a stage in the middle of this arena. So just incredible job by my colleagues that, again, I am absolutely taking no credit for.
Hey, Jess, just, as a journalist, any themes or any panel discussions or any news, like anything that came out of the conference that really stuck out for you?
Now, I have to admit, I didn't get to see as much conference content as I wanted to. But for me, I moderated a panel on the next 5 years of affiliation and what that's going to look like. And just a great group, CEOs from Katina, their new CEO, Manuel, Rake Tech board member, Gentoo Media, Jonas, their CEO. Lots of really bright minds talking about worldwide what's happening in the affiliate space and really diving into that Google update that I think everyone had a bit of a panic about. And now that we are a couple months in, they were able to be a little more retrospective about things like partnerships with mainstream media and just how you have to be smarter. Topic that came up in that panel that I think every colleague of mine ended up writing something about AI continues to both enchant and terrify our industry, I think is the best way to sum it up. It was even on non-AI panels, the tech and how to make use of that tech keeps coming up. And I think the last thing for me that kind of crossed between another panel that I did in the player protection vertical was affiliates and influencers and how affiliates can play a role in helping influencers retain their voice, but also meet the standards of a highly regulated industry. As much as I think you see Drake plugging stake, and that's kind of your idea. That's not a great example of what this should look like.
Right.
It shouldn't be someone placing ginormous bets that we don't even know if they're real, if that's funny money or not. But because it's in the unregulated space, you can't really do anything about it. So how can we do more in that space? And who's the owner of this project? And how much can the platforms themselves do a better job of helping us rein this in before I think we'll be talking about TV advertising, especially in Canada with these Senate hearings. I think if you look ahead, this is the next group that they're going to be coming after. And how do you get ahead of that right now?
Yeah, and it still feels to me, Jess, that at least in North America, where our media companies, especially professional sports rights holders, still don't have a handle, along with the operators, on how to blend sports betting content into their programming. And there's definitely a way to do it. And I'll give everybody a bit of a mulligan in terms of, we're only what, 6 years post PASPA now, where we're going on 3 years of regulated betting in Ontario. It's the only province in Canada. So we're still quite early, but there's certainly a lot of room to do in that area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, picks, it's an obvious way to go. I get it. People, essentially all of sport, I mean, you've done sports broadcasting more than I have, but like all of these talking head shows fundamentally are taking sides on, do you think this person is worth the contract or worth, starting or whatever? That it boils down to picks. Like it fits very naturally in there, but I'm so bored with it. As soon as I saw the Hawk Tua girl is now giving
Right.
picks was when I was just like, I think we need to move on. I'm
Yeah.
going to shout out, I have been following this and I find it really interesting. I think what FanDuel is doing with Rob Gronkowski is some of the most interesting stuff that I've seen in terms of getting a sports star to promote your product, because they keep him very far away from sports betting. He doesn't give picks. Because that's not the Gronk energy that we all kind of know and appreciate. So they made a cornhole game branded with him on their skill game site. They're having him play poker on their Poker Stars branded television show and be part of their Poker Stars event in Las Vegas next month. They have him go to live dealer studios and just like sit with the dealer and answer questions. Like, this is, to me, a much more interesting use of somebody than just, okay, well, we can't get LeBron's picks on the NBA, so we'll get LeBron's picks on the NFL. So shout out to them for thinking outside the box on this one.
Yeah, instead of like trying to cram a celebrity into the betting space, just even if they aren't someone who bets or someone who's not an expert on betting, I couldn't agree more. I'd say the same thing about FanDuel in Canada with the Megan Chayka segments on the NHL coverage, where again they're using Megan's expertise around analytics and data to tell stories that have a betting tie at the end. But to me, that's again smart use of someone who's got expertise in a certain area and who's
Yeah.
not making picks for somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Preaching to the choir on that one. So
Hey, I want to start, Jess. Tom Nightingale at SBC's done Canadian Gaming Business has done some really good coverage around the Senate hearings this week, and we had Paul Burns on the previous podcast talking about his testimony to the Senate Transportation and Communications Committee on Bill S269 to create a national framework for advertising and sports betting. And again, I think it's interesting just because we're seeing a little bit of in the U.S. with the U.S. Safe Bet Act that's been proposed by two senators in your neck of the woods that they want to have a ban on sports betting advertising. But this is a very it's a very complicated issue, and as I mentioned to Paul, there's some economic issues at play here too, where the opening of a regulated gambling market in Ontario has been a real lifeline to media companies, especially post COVID. And you and I both know the dire straits that the media industry is in today.
yeah, it's interesting. Again, I'm gonna theme of this. I'm going to defer the praise to people. I technically am in charge of CGB, but Tom is very much the engine behind this one. So shout out to him for doing. He sent me you can read it. It's very long. You have testimony from literally everyone that spoke, and there's more to come. My understanding is there are 2 more hearings on the docket here. And he was like, well, this is the pared down version. And I'm like, good Lord. He's very thorough. But reading that one, what was interesting to me is, okay, we're just going to apparently have the same exact argument every single place. There's going to be religious objections, RG objections, and objections for people that the heart of this problem is, I believe it was Dr. Alan Feldman who first pointed this out to me, and I keep just referring back to him because it was at a conference about a year ago. There's no research on advertising.
Right.
I think ICRG is. I recently spoke with Arthur Pikowski of ICRG. He's saying they've got some stuff coming out that'll be out before the end of the year. I don't. I think it will be super informative, but it's such a broad topic. It won't necessarily even be the be all end all on it. We just don't know. Like, are we fixing something that's not even a problem with advertising? It's one of those, it feels like we should do something things that just keeps coming up across the board. And you're right that there's a lot of overlap with this and the Safe Bet Act in terms of what should the federal government be doing if states or provinces are making decisions that do have national ramifications. I think both in the US and Canada, you're seeing in the US, it just makes sense for FanDuel and DraftKings and a couple other operators to buy nationally at this point. It's cheaper. The way that Canadian broadcasting is set up, some of this is unavoidable, right? Correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Right. Yep, that's right.
I in the US, I don't Safe Bet Act, do I think it goes anywhere? No. It's very, and if you did, I think there would very quickly be a 10th Amendment challenge to it because we've kind of, that battle's been conceded, that this is not something the federal government is going to do. But do I hate the idea of like minimum standards across states and markets? No, I don't hate that idea of it. This actually did walk back a bit Tonko's original thing, which was essentially the same thing that the US did to cigarettes, which is you can't do any sort of advertising with it. So this wouldn't have just eliminated ads on television. It would have killed affiliates in the United States because you wouldn't be able to talk about it on the internet either. So this is a tamer version of it. As I said when I read it, it was every idea anyone has ever suggested the industry should think about thrown into a single bill. It's kind of a kitchen sink vibe to it, right?
Yeah, I also think, Jess, there's a bit of hypocrisy too to having a regulated industry and then putting the kind of restrictive guardrails. I mean, we saw here in Canada, and I'm sure you saw in the U.S. as well, with tobacco advertising. The Canadian government takes in billions of dollars a year in cigarette taxes, and when they place that ban on sponsorship and advertising dollars by those companies, it had a real impact on arts and entertainment and sports events in this country. And again, I'm a non-smoker. I'm not even close to what you call a casual bettor. But I do believe strongly if you have deemed something to be legal, they should be entitled, for the most part, to have the same ability to conduct business as grocery chains or car dealerships or banks or whatever you want to say. And I say that realizing that there are going to be health issues. We know people die from smoking. We know there are addiction issues with gambling. We know that there are addiction issues from alcohol. But I think there's a fine line to walk there.
Absolutely. And again, though, if you look at the numbers, prevalence studies, and sure, the US and Ontario, it's relatively new online gaming, but we have data from Europe that's pretty aged by comparison.
Right.
And what we've also seen, like, I mean, when we were younger, you could go to Atlantic City or you could go to Vegas, and those were kind of the casinos. And now many states have casinos, and there's been a huge uptick in the nearest casino. Like where I live, a casino did not exist within driving distance, like a day's driving distance 20 years ago. And now there are several options. And we've seen that prevalence isn't going up. We've seen more people are participating, but the issues of serious problem gambling are consistently staying in that 1% to 3% range. And that's a lot of people, especially as the population grows, and we should be mindful of it. And I think I probably take to task the industry more than a lot of people that I don't love the finger pointing to the offshore market every time someone makes a valid criticism about RG. I think RG messaging is not great. It's the micro machines read at the end of the commercials. I compared it to Guess Who the other day, where they had to and say like, oh, by the way, these game cards don't talk. Like that's not a great way of doing things. And I think it's completely valid to question the efforts that we're making and how we can do more. And I think the federal bill I do like is the GRIT Act, where funding is at the heart of this, the biggest issue. We need to research, we need to know more of what we're doing. And I am seeing bill after bill go through that is not adequately addressing funding, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I
I
think that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, and I also think the government's really missed an opportunity here in Ontario, Jess, on having that tax revenue and targeting towards spending on addiction programs or and telling that story, and that's been a failing of the province. And you're right. I think a lot of responsible gambling messaging, it's the radio ad where they're talking 50 kilometers an hour if you're in Canada, and then for the last 9 seconds commercial, they're going 150 kilometers an hour to get in the RG messaging. I
Well, and
don't.
if you're in the US, there's like 17 phone numbers because we can't all agree that 1-800-GAMBLER is fine.
Right, right. And I do think, that in Ontario, that there has been criticism of iGaming Ontario, the delay in getting a centralized self-exclusion program. And I think that's something that probably should have been a greater priority. And there are people in the industry that would tell you that. And to your point too, I think if anyone that follows you at Jess Welman on Twitter/X, they know that you're not a shill or an advocate for the industry, that you're quite happy to point out the good, bad, and the ugly of the industry. So you've been very consistent, and that's as long as we've known each other. The other part about the U.S. Safe Bet Act, and I want to raise it too, Jess, because it came up in the Senate hearings this week, was a proposal on the banning of in-play betting, and I just think that's not gonna happen. It's like almost makes me think of telling alcohol consumers that you can no longer buy a 6-pack of beer, you can buy 1 can of beer.
In play is getting super interesting to me as this. I understand the concern around. I mean, I get why people who especially are unfamiliar with it, the idea that you can bet over and over and over again, and the dopamine hits that come with that, I understand. Again, need way more research to really understand exactly what the impact of that is. What's interesting to me too is that some of these other conversations about things like transparency and things, I realize we only have so much time, but I'm going to bring up the Massachusetts limiting meeting because this to me, I find the limiting conversation interesting. Do I think it's going to go anywhere? Not particularly. I think at best they're going to pass some sort of regulation that you have to notify a consumer when they're being limited on a certain market. I have conflicted feelings about limiting myself. I don't, as I say over and over again, nobody owes you the right to be a professional sports bettor. Like nobody, the goal isn't to design a system that people make a living off this. What to me was way more interesting than the content of the limiting discussion was there was a discussion of court siding. For those who aren't familiar, this isn't like, oh, Steve and I went to the Super Bowl, and because we were there, it was really cool that we wanted to bet in game a couple of times on the game that we were watching. The operators are talking about the practice of someone knowing that they can stay ahead of the official data feed. They're going to buy tickets to live sporting events, and with the intent of profiting, bet in game over and over and over again. And the comment from Eileen O'Brien, who was always the most interesting commissioner for me, is, well, if you can't stay ahead of these people, maybe you shouldn't be offering this product. Which, in not so many words, is saying perhaps we shouldn't be offering in-game betting, period. Which was a really interesting door to stumble into. I don't know if the average pro bettor is going to be like is it worth pushing this limiting discussion in Massachusetts if a potential ramification is that you just get in-game off the table entirely?
Right, right. And I will say, Jess, the one thing that scares me about, I don't play. I'm not an iGaming person because, to be completely frank, it scares me the idea that you can be on your phone and press the roulette wheel over and over again. That is a little bit scary to me. And again, I think that's why it's so important for operators to have those guardrails in place, and to for customers to have that ability to be kicked off if they're if their gaming gets out of control.
Yeah, it's a question, and I'm a poker player at heart, so I guess like
Right.
because poker kind of gets grouped with iGaming, it's tricky because like with poker, and I think sports betting falls into this too. Your goal is if you're going to take it seriously, and again, it's not the operator's job to cater to me if I'm going to take it seriously. Volume is key to riding out variance. I had times in my life where I was not that serious of an online poker player, but I would have 6, 7 tables open at a single time while I was playing, and that's kind of the appeal of it. Whereas if I, play at a casino, I have one table, and if I just am on the wrong side of variance over and over again, it's a really miserable night. Um,
Right.
so I think it's interesting where the balance is on it. And this is again where I think that a big conversation that's kind of not being had with in-game, with limiting, with same-game parlays is we still don't fully, I mean, the operators understand this audience more than we do. We don't really know what the average person wants. I think so many people in the sports media or sports betting industry think that the average sports bettor is in it to make money and make sharp bets and things like that. And there is this resistance to the idea that they want to bet. I want to bet a same game parlay, even though I know I'm probably going to lose. For $5, I can create a situation where I have a sweat that lasts me 6.5 hours on a Sunday. And I will lose that money, and that's fine. And this mindset is just something that these people who have been in the business a really long time, who, you know, say they sports bet the right way and book the right way, they just can't wrap their brain around it. And I don't know, I'm curious your thoughts. I don't think that having an SGP heavy slate is a bad thing.
No, and I
It
think, yeah, I think there's a lot of education out there and a lot of information that if you're that betting on a whole bunch of same game parlays to get rich is a path to is the wrong road to be on. But for me, I like, if the NFL playoffs, for example, which I only follow the NFL very casually during the season, yeah, I'll pick a same game parlay and put $5 on it just for a bit of fun. And if I'm watching Hockey Night in Canada where I live, yeah, I'm probably gonna bet a parlay on Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews and the Maple Leafs in a game. But again, I'm a $2 and $5 better, and that's my only bet for the night. If I lose that bet, I'm not going rushing over to the Vancouver Edmonton game to put a same game parlay on that. And I'm assuming that I'm probably in the majority of people who play. I just like to get back quickly to the online poker for a second, just for the sake of our audience, and also for me personally. Like, when you had those 6 or 7 games open, like, what are the checks and balances that you would have put in place to kind of keep an eye on your spending?
huh. You know, there is that's a good question. I probably could have done better, to be honest, because I would look at, you could always pull up and see exactly what your balance was, but there is a functionality in most online betting or online poker software where, you can, for those who don't know, it's advantageous to max buy-in as much as you can at a poker table because you can have people covered, and you don't want to pick up aces and have $5 sitting in front of you when you could have had 20 and gotten someone to call all 20 versus just call all 5. So it automatically tops you off after every hand that you play. So say I lost $1.50 in a hand, it would top you back off to 20. And there are people I know who turn that functionality off wisely to better understand how many buy-ins they are winning or losing in a given session. But I would do the top offs, and there were times where I would glance at my balance and be like, oh, I didn't realize like I'd leaked that much out of there. And it's a tricky spot. I track winning and losing set. I play enough that it's worthwhile to me to keep a spreadsheet and just see for the entire year I played this much, I won this much. I don't play online anymore, but if I did, these would go in there. And I think most of my friends that take it with any degree of seriousness follow a similar protocol of just assessing at the end of every session where you're at on things. It also just depended, right? Like I could lose a bunch because I got it in as a huge favorite and got unlucky versus I'm playing bad. It's more often that I would say you are not making good decisions and I would stop playing versus a monetary thing, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Sure. Thanks for that. I want to ask you about Alberta in a minute. Before I do, I just want to, we haven't had you on in a while, and I just want to kind of get a lay of the land. We're recording this podcast on Friday, October 4th. We're in the last quarter of 2024, and I just wonder what's kind of top of mind with the industry in the U.S. right now. I haven't heard a lot lately about, the push to have more regulated iGaming and U.S. states across the country. You don't hear much right now about California, Texas, and Florida. What are kind of the stories that you're following most closely right now for SBC Americas?
I feel like I write the word sweepstakes 6,000 times
Can
a
you,
day.
can you can you explain that, Jess? Because again, that's something that I've just
Oh man, how long is this
yeah,
pod?
I was gonna say in a
I'll try
hundred
my
words,
best. The
100 words or
simplest
less.
version of this is sweepstakes casinos, sports books, poker sites are all rooted in laws that are worldwide. I'm sure Canada has sweepstakes laws that basically, you know, the McDonald's Monopoly game that was the
Yes,
big thing in the 90s. It's the law that makes contests like that okay. It's saying, okay, for a purchase or if you mail in a self-addressed stepped envelope to McDonald's, they'll send you tokens. So there's a way to play for free. If you don't want to purchase, you can take part in this contest in which cash and prizes are on the line. So at this, some very creative people developed what typically your first sign that is something that may call itself a social casino is a sweeps casino is there are two forms of currency they'll have different names depending on the sites, but most of them they tend to call them like sweeps coins and gold coins or sweeps dollars and gold dollars. Some of these are free that you can just get, for logging in every day and things like that. And you can purchase these free to play dollars the same way you could in Candy Crush. I'm going to spend $20 to skip the clock and get 5,000 diamonds to play new levels. But what you can't get by purchasing is this other currency, and that currency is what allows you to kind of buy into these uh, games contests with real money value prizes at the end, where you can cash them out and they're worth dollars. So this two currency system, I'll tell you, I ask every lawyer I run into, and every single one of them says it is an emphatically stronger legal argument than DFS has ever had. It's a very, I mean, it varies a bit state to state. We've seen Michigan, for example, push people out. I don't think they operate in Oregon because or Washington rather, because Washington's definition of gambling at the state level is different than most people. I think it eliminates consideration from prize consideration and chance. But most states, the laws are such that these are allowed. And given that, as you pointed out, I think most people have deferred California and Texas to 2026, 2027 before we see any movement. It doesn't help that Texas only meets in odd numbered years legislatively, and that the issue, I think, at the forefront that would be much more lucrative in sports betting, so it's going to go first, is to get casinos, land-based casinos in Texas. I think that's where the push is going to be next year. Since none of those are growing, a lot of people are like, well, I can have the liquidity of 40 states right away if I just go to sweeps.
right.
And
Okay.
we had a really good interview with Jacob Fortinsky of Novig on SBC Americas last week, where This was a group, they tried to be regulated, but the problem was, one, they're a small operator, and we've seen it's very difficult to achieve scale because it's just so expensive, the overhead and the licenses and payment processing. But going against Novig as well was the fact that, like Profit, they were an exchange. And there are currently 2 states that even are regulatorily allow you to be an exchange. There's New Jersey, and Colorado is in the process of allowing it, but forced Novig to launch as like a traditional sports book because they weren't ready to go into that exchange model. So it wasn't that sweeps was just like but then they pivot to sweeps, and now they have the liquidity you need to be a healthy exchange. You have much more person to person interaction and socialness to it, that it's just kind of this natural fit for it. And it's still the same checks, balances, KYC, AML, and everything that they had when they were in Colorado, but it's just an ability to achieve scale that they never would have been able to be given in the regulated space.
Okay.
So we're going to see this. I think the AGA will continue this push against sweeps. We'll see how successful they are, because I think the way that they're going to need to do this, you could go kind of 2 ways. You could go state by state with some sort of court challenge, and there are a couple pending. I think the most interesting one is happening in Georgia right now, because the vast majority of these sites, like everything, has binding arbitration in their terms and conditions. That you can't sue us, you got to take us to arbitration. This person very actively opted out of arbitration, so it has a much more likely chance of moving forward. But then that just means Georgia, it doesn't mean the rest of the country. So you can do it state by state like that. Or I think what we'll see at Nickel G's in December is a lot of people lobbying state lawmakers to draft bills that specifically rewrite sweeps law to carve these people out of the process.
Okay. Hey, it feels too, Jess. It kind of feels like the bun fight around daily fantasy sports has died down a little bit too.
I keep saying Prize Picks and Underdog need to send, VGW and Fliff the biggest fruit baskets ever, because they're just like, we're over it.
Right,
You're
right.
small potatoes compared to these guys. The thing that I'm very interested in, I'm sorry, you got me started on sweeps, and now I'm not going to stop.
You keep going.
But during Lisbon, I saw that the World Poker Tour has announced they are launching a sweeps poker product in 40 plus states at the start of 2025. What's super interesting about this is VGW is the largest group in this space. They own Chumba, Lucky Land, and Global Poker. They're Australian based, and they are notoriously tight lipped. They don't speak to anybody. We got a comment from them on their pulling out of Connecticut because they were served a cease and desist. And it was the first time we'd heard from their PR organization about anything. So the fact that a group like the World Poker Tour, that is very out there, very outspoken, very public, and very easy to find, is comfortable enough to move forward on a very large scale with a sweeps product, kind of tells me where the tide is going, because they're not publicly traded or anything. So that is a bit different. But this group, they're putting on a $5 million free roll as part of their December event to promote this new thing. They're going to put it all over their television product and their website and their content. This is going to be a big, big, big push in a very public way that we haven't really seen in the sweep space before. And I don't know who might push back against them, because they have really good relationships with casinos. They have a great relationship with Wynn. They have an ongoing relationship with Hard Rock. They work with casinos across the world. I don't know if a casino organization like the AGA, if there's as much appetite to come after somebody like that when they're a partner of yours.
I want to ask you where we are with the road to regulated gambling in Alberta, and we do know Paul Burns was on the previous episode of the podcast. He did mention that Dale Nally, the red tape reduction minister for the province, will be at the Global Gaming Expo in Las Vegas this week, where you are. Any news that you have on what's going on out there?
We don't quite have anything official, but we had started hearing some whispers. I don't know if you heard these whispers as well. I think when Minister Nally came to CGS in the summer, it was just like, we're doing this. Hoorah, let's go, open the floodgates. And we're taping this on Friday. This has not been posted yet, but by the time you listen to this, Tom will have a story up on Canadian Gaming Business about how the cabinet in Alberta was less gung ho than Minister Nally was about things. And Paul and the CGA confirmed to us that this is not going to be some just we're rolling right through, we're ready to go in a few months. I think they want him to go back to the drawing board a bit and refine some things and really think through. And Paul frames it in a positive light. And I think it's fair to say it's not that it's not going to happen. The phrase he used was a pause. And I think the idea is to make sure that everything is ironed out and right. And as you know, and we've talked about this a lot on CGB, it would make no sense to just cut and paste Ontario into Alberta.
Right.
And you have to take the time to make sure that other stakeholders in this, particularly First Nations, feel comfortable with how they're moving forward on this. So I will be at this discussion on Wednesday to see what Minister Nally has to say about where this is going and how progress is. But I think for all of us, it's certainly a little disappointing. Everybody wants things faster. Who doesn't? But in the long run, it's probably going to be a good thing that we take our time with this a little more than we initially anticipated.
And realistically, Jess, like when you look at, Minister Nally was in Toronto in June. We know that everything slows down this summer, including our elected officials. This isn't an easy market to set up. I think, Ontario did happen pretty quickly with iGaming Ontario under Martha Otten's leadership, and there were some hiccups along the way. I mean, no fault of Martha's, but there was a mandate to get this market up and running quickly from the Conservative government here in Ontario, and they did that. Um, the one thing I do wonder is I think Brigitte Sand was hired as a consultant and had quite a uh, prominent role to play in helping get the Ontario regulated marketplace set up. And I just wonder, there's so much on the plate of government officials these days that you do wonder if there needs to be a point person for uh, getting this regime set up. And I'm not quite sure that a provincial body or a ministry can do what needs to be done. Is that a fair comment?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing that Ontario had going for it was infrastructure, OLG and AGCO. And certainly Alberta has its equivalent, but I think there were probably, again, you want to make sure you're building it right versus building it fast. And that needs to happen and make sure that it's, again, I doubt anybody in Alberta, if you're anything like the States, we don't want to do it Ontario's way. We have things that we'd like to fix. And as you pointed out, things like self-exclusion lists and those sorts of things, if you can get that fixed and make sure that just, I mean, even the minutia of something like this, but to my understanding, some of the issue is that every operator kind of think about an Excel sheet. You have first name, last name, address, and it's all in a different order. And so you then have to take these existing things and recalibrate them in a way that you can universally mesh them together. It's time consuming. As someone who hates Excel, it sounds like my nightmare.
Right.
That if you can, from the jump, have the format ready to go before you mobilize and create the problem for yourself, it's so worth it to slow down and get it right.
I think the most important point right now might be for the minister at some point to have a firm timeline, because one thing that I know, I'm sure you hear this from operators as well as I do, is that uh, you know, Alberta is not the only market that may open up at some point right now. We know there's a lot of focus on Brazil. There's this continued push for iGaming in the U.S. that we talked about earlier. There's
I don't think the US will keep them busy next year, I'll be honest, but
So that's probably a positive. But again, I think these operators do want to have some sense of a timeline so that they can have the wheels in motion and be ready when that market launches.
Yeah, I think, and being reasonable about the timeline. I appreciated the enthusiasm, but even in June, I just kind of raised an eyebrow at like, it feels weird that one guy is just like, yeah, we're doing this, let's go. It just is so counter to what I've experienced when any other marketplace is moving forward with expansion and the processes you have to go through, that I think we were all very excited and hoped that it would be that simple, but as history has taught us, it never is.
No, and I think even I think IGO's had some challenges with reporting because again, it was in this mad dash to get the market up and running, and probably just weren't quite ready staffing
Oh,
wise to
yeah.
deal with
I mean,
that.
remember that first, it was like 4 numbers, that first report.
Well,
It was a
that's
PowerPoint slide.
yes, and I think that's the other thing too. And again, this is something Martha Otten's been very transparent about is that they would like to provide more data, but again, that's been a bit of a slow boat, the self exclusion program. So there is a lot of work to be done. And then I hear, we had Amanda Brewer and Phil Gray on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about the cost of doing business, and there has been grumbling from operators in Ontario about all the different costs of from the application to going through the compliance process, and even I've heard from people about concerns if the tax rate went any higher than 20% in Alberta, along with these other ancillary costs, that there could be some pushback from operators, and some operators might be reluctant to come into Alberta as well.
If you look at the United States right now, particularly on the sports betting side, getting that balance right is paramount because we've seen so many exits in Colorado and Arizona, uh, some European companies pulling out entirely. If you want a robust market, and we're seeing, a lot of states just can't sustain more than 6 or 7. I think Colorado was perhaps a bit ambitious in how many people they let in, and because they were early, people eagerly went there, that it's not entirely the structure's fault. But every small operator I talk to is points out, we have to vet everybody in every state, in every market we go into. It's not just the upfront licensing fee, it's the 9 million other fees that come with it and the way it adds up, and the process that you have to go through and the workload of getting all of your paperwork together varies from state to state. And if you're FanDuel, it's a lot easier to get this stuff done than if you're a startup or a smaller operator. So I think, especially now, you have to look to your neighbors to the south and see that we've pushed out a lot of small operators, and some of it is just there, it's not economically viable, but I think it's fair to say that some of it is that in the desire to rush bills through in the post-COVID era, things just didn't get ironed out the way they should have.
Right.
I think that the industry was fine to just be like, just push through whatever we can, and it's fine. We just want more states. And now I think the reason that you're seeing things take more time, you look at a place like Missouri where you have big operators like Caesars not on board with the way Missouri wants to do things. They're sharp now, and there are so few states left that they can be a little pickier and push back to try to get something that's more palatable for the long term.
And I think in terms of the timeline too, if I remember correctly, Jess, like when I was writing the newsletters still, I think Ohio took about at like 12, it was like a 12-month lead up to launch, was it not?
It was, whereas my home state, as I look at Ohio across the river, my home state mobilized in like 4 months.
Right.
And I'll be honest, it wasn't the best rollout. Certainly, the numbers were fine. I think the framework is sound, but you had an organization, and this is, I think, something that Alberta is going to experience as well. In the state of Kentucky, we have a regulator that is extremely good at regulating horse racing,
Right.
the best
Right.
in the world at regulating horse racing. There is no institutional knowledge about how to regulate a sports book. And there wasn't really an opportunity to develop that institutional knowledge because it happened so quickly. And I think there were a couple of people that stepped up to the challenge, but I will march down to Frankfurt and tell them myself that I still think they lack the institutional knowledge necessary to do this well. And that's why this year the state completely overhauled how it regulates gambling, and created a new corporation and a new group because it was just reactionary. Like, okay, we're really messing this up, and we need to think about a new way to do this than what we were doing.
Last question, Jess. You're on your way to G2E. I'm just wondering what's kind of top of mind, top of the agenda for you in Las Vegas.
I lots of operator visits. It's always good to catch up with operators. This is also the time of year I, like you, am not a slots person. But one of my favorite things about G2E is getting to catch up with the IGTs,
Right.
aristocrats, and stuff of the world, and see what the new products are and the thought process that goes into them. And then I think in terms of kind of what I think the conversations will be, it's going to be a lot of sweeps discussion. I don't think the sweeps operators will be there. As you know, AGA works very closely with G2E in the same way that they wouldn't let Underdog throw
Yes.
an event on site last year. They're not going to let anybody from sweeps in there, but I think it's something that everyone will continue to be discussing, and you'll have people on both sides in the same place, and curious where that is going to go.
Hey, Jess. Well, I have you too. I do want to give a shout out to Sue Schneider because
Oh my gosh, I'm so sad.
yes,
I'm happy for her, but I'm devastated that she's
yeah,
leaving our company. I am so thrilled what she and Paris and Kelly are going to be doing next. I certainly will see her in Las Vegas. But yeah, so we were all happily heartbroken that she's moving on to new things, but it's inevitable. She's Sue Schneider. She always is doing something new.
I mean, yeah. And for those who haven't read it, Sue Schneider left SBC after the Lisbon conference, and she's joined Kelly Keane and Paris Smith to create Defy the Odds, a startup business. And I've often said, Jess, there's a lot of really good people in this industry, yourself included, but Sue certainly at the top of the list, and just so generous with her time, so passionate. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't think it comes as a surprise to either one of us that she's doing something new. She's an amazing woman.
Yeah, she's still on our company Slack, so I feel like I haven't quite had to say goodbye to her yet. I'm hoping they just forget to remove her, or somebody's like, "We'll just let her stay. It's fine." Because yeah, she fills me in on stuff. I joke with her that she's kind of like whack-a-mole to me because I never know where she's going to contact me. It could be DMs on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or Slack or email or a phone call, and I'm gonna miss the surprise of this. But she also, it's helpful to have somebody who has a different network than you and is covering things from a different perspective, because she brings things to me that I don't encounter, and I'm gonna miss that a lot.
Yeah, and somebody who not just throws bouquets but throws bricks at the industry and calls them out
Yeah.
when things aren't being done above board. So I won't be in Vegas, but please give Sue, when you see her, give her a big hug from myself and Mark Silver and the rest of the gang of Parlay
I
Media.
will, of course. After my own, of course. So, but you're next in line. You will be the second hug.
Much appreciated. Hey, we'll make sure in the Substack post, Jess, we'll make sure we link to your IGRL conversation from
Oh
the
yeah,
week
thank you for
before
that.
this.
That was a good chat. They're going to be, I mean, it might go up after this. They'll be in Vegas with their conference at Venetian as well. If anybody wants to pop in on that, it's for everybody. It's not just like you have to be a clinician or a researcher to find this research worthwhile. So
Yeah, we'll link to that. We'll link to Tom's coverage of the Senate hearings this week, and we'll also link to the coverage of the Alberta story that Jess mentioned earlier. Jessica Welman, the editor in chief of Canadian Gaming Business, SBC Americas, has been it's funny, Jess, been way too long. And when I was driving home from the Canadian Gaming Summit, one of my regrets is that I think we
I
barely
think I
said
just
hi to each
waved at
other.
you in
Yeah,
passing, and that was about it,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, which I felt kind of bad about that. So it's great to have this catch up.
I'm
Always
always
really
happy to come on. I was glad you reached out. It had been a while. I was like, maybe he doesn't need my insights anymore. So
no,
happy to be back in the on the grind of the GNCS show.
Great. Thanks, Jess. And yeah, anybody that wants to follow this industry, you should definitely at Jess Welman on X. She's a great follow. She tells it like it is. And again, we appreciate Jess being on the show. That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find us at gamingnewscanada.ca for this and all of our podcasts. Also find us on the various podcasting platforms. Thanks again to Jessica Welman. Everybody who's going to G2E, safe travels, and we will see everybody again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.